Hi everyone, thank you very much for joining. Really excited about this Privacy Kitchen session on security and identity at the heart of security. So security is one of GDPR's 7 principles, but it's fundamental. You cannot have data protection if you don't have good security. Now we'll get into it in a little bit more detail now. Quick intro, I'm Robert Bohr, the founder and CEO of Keepable. We're a privacy management SaaS, helping you put a framework in really super simple on GDPR. So I've got fantastic guest chefs today, a real smorgasbord of fantastic talent. So I'm really excited. Thank you very much. So we've got Chris, Jean, and Shabad. Chris, would you mind giving everyone an intro?
Yeah, of course. Well, thanks firstly for having us, Robert. Really looking forward to this. My name's Chris Tate. I'm actually sat in my kitchen today. I've made a trip from the office, especially for this guest chef slot. I'm assuming there's no cooking involved, because that I've not been warned about that.
Not yet.
But no,
Not
I'm
yet.
pleased to be here. I currently work as Alliances Director at MyKey, and we're a password and identity management company, predominantly for MSPs, but also for enterprises.
Fantastic, fantastic. Jean, would you mind giving us an intro?
Yeah, hey everyone. My name is Gene Rich. It's really great to be here as well in the kitchen with everyone. I co-founded a company called Traceless, and at Traceless, we help businesses secure their data and identity.
Fantastic. It's a great solution as well. And Shabad?
Hi everyone, and thanks Robert for having me. There's a kitchen right over there. It's not my kitchen, but I'm lucky enough to have escaped London for a few days. We're in the Cotswolds doing a bit of client work, so we're in a lovely house in the Cotswolds, and there's a very nice big kitchen there. So next time we can have the next one in there. So I'm Shabad from Tech Sapiens. We're a London-based IT service provider. Our clients generally are typically organizations between 10 and 100 staff who want to be set free from the hassle of managing their IT. So we tend to work as their technology team, structured like a department in their organization. So all the way from an IT director down to junior members of the team who can sort of clean out the IT cupboards and things like that. And we tend to look after everything from IT to internet, phones, laptops, cloud services, IT support, security and compliance, and everything in between.
Fantastic. And that's why I'm so excited about this panel. So full disclosure, everyone here is a partner with Keepable, and there's a reason for that. I'm delighted to bring everybody this wonderful talent here today. We all bring something different in, and actually Shabad's probably the point person for all of those customers and provide that view about how to bring it all together. So I just wanted to start with a couple of stats from the UK Information Commissioner's Office. And the UK Information Commissioner's Office for basically calendar Q3 of 2020 released its stats on breaches, and cybersecurity incidents were 28% of breaches. So over a quarter, just under a third of all breaches were cybersecurity. Almost all of those were about identity. They were about phishing. They were about ransomware and unauthorized access. Funnily enough, brute force is actually quite small, but phishing is the biggie, followed by unauthorized access and ransomware. So today's session is really, really timely. So Shabad, if I could ask you to sort of, IAM, if you could just deconstruct this for people, because it's a bit scary acronym, and we're all about operational practical steps here. What is IAM and how should people think about it?
Absolutely. Well, you couldn't work in IT without loving acronyms, because I mean our industry is an acronym. So yeah. Or TLAs, 3-letter acronyms. So yeah, as you said, identity and access management it's a key component when we're thinking about privacy and security governance. And it's hard to have good privacy and security governance without a solid identity management framework. There's a lot to it, but I kind of try and break it, sort of just focus on a couple of key concepts, I think. And hopefully it'll come across as fairly obvious to everybody listening, because that means we've got listeners and viewers who know what they're doing. But it's something that we come across very regularly, that organizations that don't have a good identity management framework. And it can, at the most basic, be as simple as a shared account. So if anyone in your organization is sharing an account to log into something, fundamentally you don't know who is logging into that account, right? Because it could be this person or that person. So it could be that you've got a spare computer in the office that anyone can sit down to quickly and log on to do a Google search or check their email. It may be an account with a vendor that multiple people can use to order something from them. It may be that somebody goes on holiday and a colleague needs to check their email while they're away. Or maybe that someone's got a sticky note on their on their screen with the password to something. And I mean, this is, it's funny, but we come across it all the time. And we sometimes think we're in 2021. This should be a thing of the past. And as Chris will talk about, we would love for sticky notes with passwords on them to be a thing of the past. And sometimes there's other scenarios where somebody gets handed a laptop which automatically logs into an account that they can start using, things like that. So as I said, hopefully these are all very obvious, but we still come across them all the time. It's that sort of convenience versus security continuum, and the more convenient something is, the worse it is probably from a security point of view, unless you've got good tools that help with that. And so that's sort of identity, and yeah, in a nutshell. And then the second part of that, I guess, is access, which is the way we tend to approach access is the concept of least privilege. So, which basically means granting someone as little access as they need to do their job and nothing more than that. It sounds a little mean, but it's a fundamental part of good privacy and security governance. And of course, everyone should have access to the resources that they need, but nothing more than that. And from a data point of view, that means mapping out the people and data in your organization and putting a good plan in place to design data access according to the principle of least privilege. And that's still something that we come across a lot, where even organizations who have thought about it from time to time, things tend to lapse and they get weaker over time and no one reviews it. And then you find you've got a drive full of sensitive data that everybody's got access to, which they shouldn't do.
It's very common.
Yeah. So it's that type of thing that needs active management. You need to keep doing it. It's security is a process, right? It's not an event. So yeah, that's
absolutely.
What we
and I think that's fantastic. I think from the GDPR point of view, the security is so fundamental. There was a Polish case where a furniture company had moved its IT infrastructure into the cloud, and they had on-premise database that had information on 300,000 customers going back like 10 years, and they just basically forgotten about it. And the Polish regulator fined them a couple of €100,000 on it. And it's, as you say, it's least privilege access is a great one in terms of who can have access to what for their job. So you don't give everyone access to the HR folder. It's only the HR people, and then only certain files, etc. What sort of tools do you look at for then? You've got the identity bit, you've got the access bit. Obviously, we're going to come on. Chris is going to be taking us a bit further forward on multi-factor authentication and sharing passwords, that sort of stuff. But what sort of tools do you bring in on that? Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's, well, as you said, Chris will talk about a little bit more about passwords and multi-factor and things. But I guess the key steps are, first of all, making sure that everyone's got unique logins. So everyone's got their own login. You then have to have unique logins for each application, and then we'll talk about unique complex passwords, and Chris will expand on that. But the idea is to not reuse passwords, right? So you've got unique logins, you've got unique applications, and then I think the last study I read on this was that on average, every organization uses about 70 different applications, and sort of the top 10% use 200. But even if we think about much less than that, and we say you've got 20 applications in use in your organization, and it's probably not that hard to get to 20 by the time you've got, Office and Dropbox and Salesforce and Zoom and all your suppliers and all the other accounts, finance, HR, all of that stuff. Let's say you've got 20 applications and 20 staff. You've basically got 400 different accounts there that you need to secure and maintain. And they each have to have unique complex passwords. They each need to have MFA. So it starts getting quite difficult. And then what you want to do is try and monitor all of those, because you want to make sure that you know who's logging in, when they're logging in, is this a valid login? So things like suspicious logins, or the concept of impossible travel. So let's say, you have a login in London, and then 4 minutes later, you're trying to log in Russia or Vietnam. It's probably not you, right? So to try and put in place as many of these systems as you can to get away from this sort of thing, to flag it up automatically,
So you have then 400 accounts, you want to collect all the logs, analyze them, monitor the dark web to say, hey, listen, you know, has there been a breach, that sort of thing. So it very quickly gets quite hard work. But I'd say if an organization has managed to do that, if they've managed to get a password manager, they've managed to implement complex, unique passwords for each application, each user has their own, if they've gone and done all that legwork and they're monitoring it in some way, then that's really good. And then I'd say probably the next step on from that is single sign-on. And if we can get single sign-on working, and there's lots of different providers, and it's easy to go and just Google single sign-on, you'll find lots of providers out there. Chances are most people are already using them. So if you're using Microsoft or Google, as we all know, that anytime you go to a website and it says, sign in with Google or sign in with Facebook, that's single sign-on. And if you can do that, that identity federation piece is much easier to manage then, because instead of having to manage 400 different accounts, we then bring that down and say, actually, maybe we only have one account per person, and we federate that identity, sign on once, and that connects you to all the different apps that you need. And then it actually becomes quite easy to put a really strong lock on that door, because you don't have 400 doors to lock anymore.
I think that's a fantastic description, taking it from the ground up of IAM. I think that's wonderful. Thank you so much. And so Chris, in terms of password managers, we've heralded your coming on with a few comments there about the use of password managers not having the same password. Can you tell us a little bit about how that sort of product works? What sort of size a company uses it? Whether it's difficult to use or not, this sort of thing, and how people should be looking at password managers.
Okay, yeah, interesting. So I think that, what Shabad said there is all absolutely true and bang on, and kind of effectively was kind of what I think is really useful for people. Passwords are a terrible solution, right? I think we'll probably all agree that passwords are terrible. Everyone knows they're kind of on their way out to be things like single sign-on. It's a solution. I think it was 15 years ago, Bill Gates, who's pretty good at predicting this kind of thing, said the password's dead. But it's dying a very, very slow death in the fact that it's currently going the opposite way in terms of, I think that the stats are each user's on average expected to remember 100 passwords or some ridiculous number like this. And so the problem we've created as a technology industry is requiring people to create passwords that are very, very difficult for humans to remember. And very easy for computers to guess. It's almost like a perfect storm of sort of bad practice. And also with things like encouraging people to change passwords on every 30, 60, 90 days again, which is probably not a great idea. But it's just all things designed to encourage people to say, I can't remember these, so I'm going to have to write them down somewhere, whether that be in a sticky note, which is probably one of the better solutions, in fairness, compared to sticking it on Excel or sticking it in a Google Drive in the cloud or something. And so people are having to write them down. And I think that this is where password managers come in, is that they can take away that. It allows you to create unique, long, complex passwords for all of the applications and services you use, but you don't need to know them. You don't need to know the passwords. And so when it comes to the size of the organization, I'd say anyone, I'd go down to an individual, as in, even if you're not part of an organization, I would recommend using some kind of password manager. And then from there on, any kind of micro business up to enterprise, I think it's essential that a password manager is used. But mainly just because if, in pure simple terms, if I don't know a password, I can't share a password, I can't give away a password, I can't do anything with that. As an example, when I joined Mikey, all of my passwords were kind of pre-configured, and so I don't know what they are. I go into the password manager. We use G Suite, so I can see all of my, Google Workspace. I can see all of my passwords, all of my accounts in there, but I don't know what those passwords are. I can just authenticate to my device, 2FA onto the phone, and then I can log in. And I think that that's taking passwords out of users' hands is probably what a password manager is probably best at.
Absolutely. Gene, do you find in the US, do you think the US is ahead of Europe on password managers and use of 2FA? How have you found it with your MSP background and now moving into traceless?
Sure. So I think that what Shabad was saying reminded me of an incident that we fielded in the MSP where a customer had, we took over from a previous MSP and enabled remote desktop connection for a team of users, and had not enforced any sort of password change policies on the domain structure. And somebody brute forced a very simple one, which is intern username, intern password, right? And it's like you kind of see that, and you slap your hand against your head and say, how could that happen? But sometimes it's the pressure of customers saying, well, we have these people come and go, we want it to be easy for them.
Yeah.
And the result of that was the intern didn't have that much privileged data that they were kind of like allowed to view, but the attacker was in the system. Right? So a door was opened and somebody walked right through it. And that's typically, when you're saying most breaches start by phishing or brute force is like lower, but phishing or other methods, the getting in the door kind of is the beginning of a breach. Right. And a lot of businesses don't necessarily know that they've been breached, 5-6 months prior to actually experiencing something that feels like a ransomware or a breach itself. So I think that for me, it's just as common in the US, and I think it's really about adoption from legacy technology to the cloud, right? So if we look at standard environments, it used to be Active Directory, local computers, all in the same contained network. Right? Now you have that, but you also have, as Shabbat was saying, potentially 20 other credentials and systems that your businesses use. So for us, we are finding, people starting to adopt Google's directory or Azure, and those companies are also doing a lot of development to make it easier to do that. Obviously, Okta is a leader in SSO. And they have a great marketing pitch, but sometimes it's a little bit more complex and expensive to kind of get from everything's everywhere to a single source of credentials and account access.
And as you say, everyone, if they're using Microsoft or Google, they've got one in there already, basically, if they're using that house.
Yeah, and my prediction is that as more people move from on-prem to cloud, we're going to see a much bigger adoption of Azure SSO, because Microsoft is just adding so many things to that ecosystem and making it palatable for MSPs and people who use that environments to tie in Adobe, to tie in, another Dropbox, for example. And so I think that that'll help the adoption in worldwide.
I think you make a very good point there about the systems that people have already in their business. And I think this is something, Shabbat, as an MSP, you look at, which is, let's not reinvent the wheel. What have you got? A lot of times people in the business, they have tools they don't really realize. And you might just need to bring in, say, like a Mikey 2FA tool or something, but they've already got a lot of stuff in there they can use.
Yeah, absolutely. As you were saying, I think the whole, everyone's on Microsoft and Google already, so it's not like you have to buy into Okta or OneLogin, and there are lots of other good SSO providers out there, but you don't have to get into that. If you're paying Microsoft, you're actually already paying for Azure Active Directory, and you get a level of federation included in that. So chances are you've already paid for it. You just need someone to set it up for you. And as Gene was saying, I think it used to be much harder, and it was all enterprise sort of size companies that could do that because it was complex to set it up. And you needed to spend lots of engineering time connecting up your different applications for SSO. It's become really, really easy now. I mean, it's not easy across the board because there's lots of other players who don't integrate with other SSO providers, but all the main ones, you should be able to actually get SSO, and you shouldn't really need to have individual accounts for 6 or 7 different things when you can just have one login to protect them. And then you put MFA on that, you put a long, complex, secure, unique password on that, and then actually you're in a pretty good place.
Yeah. And then in terms of that, in terms of the passwords as well, and you were mentioning about a fantastic way to think of it, the 2020, you get 400 sort of different logins and everything, and people using the same service. Chris and Jean, you both got solutions here in terms of slightly different ways as well to deal with the fact if someone needs to log into something. How do you securely give that access? So we're not necessarily talking about sharing information right now. It's about sharing that access authentication. So Chris, within a password manager, there's generally the ability to allow sharing of access without even sharing the password. Can you just sort of take us through a bit on that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, and I don't want to get into the technical details, but Mikey kind of works in a different way to most password managers, as in there's no cloud storage involved. So with most password managers, there's a cloud involved. So, and then it uses the concept of a master password that you would then log in to a vault and have access to all the passwords. And those passwords can be shared between users in the organization. Mikey doesn't work in that way. Mikey is more, you think of it more of a distributed or peer-to-peer based solution. So my passwords only exist on my devices. So if I've got a laptop, a phone, a tablet, a desktop, my passwords operate on those devices. Plus also passwords that are shared to me by other people in the organization. So I mentioned, like in my case, my Google credentials have been shared with me so that then they appear on my devices. I could create a password or an account and then share it with someone else in a kind of similar way. And then that would synchronize to their devices. So there's no cloud storage involved. There's nothing in the middle that can kind of be logged into by someone else. Any passwords that are shared are being effectively moved from one device to another and then encrypted based on the kind of ID of that device.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Jean, you've got a really cool. It's a sort of one of the new ways. It's much like sort of consumerization of business IT in a way. It's like a Snapchat idea on sharing access, but it's such a great way of sharing. Can you talk about when someone wants access? You've got someone in a different location who needs access to a particular service, and you need to give them their access details. Your way of doing it in this structure is very interesting.
Thank you. So I think a good use case was somebody who came up to me with, hey, some in my peer group had this happen to them, right? And it was like a lot of MSPs and businesses, frankly, have customer success stories on their website. And that's to create, comfort with new leads and prospects, right? And one of the attackers had a listen on LinkedIn for new hires, right? So this company got a new CEO, and then because MSPs are unfortunately targets for organized crime and hacking organizations, when the new CEO got the job, they waited a few days and said, called the help desk and say, hey, this is Rob over here. Yeah, my password's not working. Can you reset it for me? And they said, oh yeah, of course, you're the CEO, you're the new person, here's your new password, right? 15 minutes later, the real CEO calls and said, hey, my email just stopped working. Maybe, I don't know what's going on, right? And what was going on is that, the password had been whale fished by an attacker, right? So, for me, this comes into lens two things, right? What Chris is working on, I think turning on MFA all over the place will reduce your risk probably 80%. It's like the 80-20 rule. It's literally the easiest thing to do that has the biggest impact on any business, whether you're an IT provider or another business of any kind, right? And the second is what Traceless does, which is verify the identity of service requesters, right? And I think that we're going to be evolving, banks do it, other privileged websites and access points have ways to verify the callers. We deal with the most sensitive information for many customers. So that's one part of Traceless. And then the other part is, how do you send sensitive data securely? And I think that a hot topic in this right now is like, with WhatsApp and adopting Facebook's privacy policy, right? And so people are kind of feeling, well, this was encrypted and it was my data, and now it's not. It's no longer my data, right? And we're going to see this happening more and more. And from an MSP perspective, we felt that we were leaving a lot of sensitive data at rest, right? So sitting in email, sitting in places that are big vectors for attackers. And so we decided to create a solution and realize that other businesses want to send and receive sensitive information without adopting a different tool that changes their entire way of communicating. So for us, it's like, hey, if you like text, great. If you like email, awesome. If you want to chat somebody something sensitive, that works too. We're kind of agnostic to that because we're outside of all those systems.
Yeah.
Sorry if I could just interrupt there, Robert. I think that's an amazing point from Gene. That is something that when I previously worked in MSPs and kind of struggled with this a little, that we're doing all of this with MFA and different tools and systems for passwords and identity. But then someone can just pick up the phone, call the MSP and say, can you, I've forgotten my password, can you reset it, or can you let me in, or whatever. And no one's checking that. There's not really been a way of kind of monitoring and checking that identity. And I think that it's such an obvious thing now you think about it, but I don't think it has been thought of enough before. So I think that's such an important part of the whole solution.
It is actually. Let's talk about that for a bit, because we didn't really have it in the original agenda, but it is an absolutely key part, and it was an oversight by my part. Really, we were talking really about, I was really looking at identity and access management within the organization. But as you absolutely rightly say, so for example, confirmation of people calling is really huge, not just for phishing or social engineering attacks, but also in the world of data subject access requests. So, you know, can I have all the personal data you have on me? We did a great privacy kitchen last week on the stuff on the website, and you know, there you're looking at providing someone with all the personal data you have on them, everything, the sensitive stuff as well. They can have absolutely the whole lot. Please send it to this email address, or print it out for me to hear. You know, so having a methodology, like you say, to do 2FA effectively on those callers, on those people who are asking, whichever way it is, whichever medium is super important. Thanks for that. Absolutely key.
Yeah, it is brilliant. I think it's crazy that we still have this. I mean, you know, from the, I don't know if you, obviously you guys will remember Kevin Mitnick and how he started his whole career in social engineering. And it's funny to me that we still have exactly the same tricks that you can still use, and you know, nothing has really changed. You know, even the basic things of, yes, when someone calls into our service desk, what do? Well, we call back a known phone number. That's what we do, because you don't actually just do a password reset for somebody on the phone, right? Because that could be anybody.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think absolutely, you know, we've talked about all the clever stuff in the technology, but still the humans remain that probably the easiest link in that security chain to breach. And that's what we're trying to do, is if you can put a really strong lock around one door and get them to really guard that door carefully as well, and train the people to guard that door carefully, then I think that becomes a much easier system to protect. But yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So just moving into the next part of it, on sharing breaches. So obviously the Grindr case was announced today, that the Norwegian Data Protection Authority is about to fine Grindr 10 million euros for sharing people's data. And obviously there's a sexual preference, which is special categories of personal data, so it needs more protection. Sharing it with advertisers, and sharing a lot more GPS location, apparently. I mean, they're sharing where people are, everything. I mean, it's absolutely very sensitive, and they were doing it allegedly without very good consents or adequate consents at all. 10 million euros is, they're a 100 million euro revenue company, so it's 10%, and GDPR's fines are 20 million euros or 4% of turnover, whichever's higher. So they've obviously gone for the 20 million sort of limit on this one. So it's a significant thing. So we talked about internal identities and external identities and access to different systems. In terms of sharing information then, so maybe Shawad, if you could just take us through, as an MSP and you're dealing with this the whole time, you're putting in place best practice for your customers. What are your tips to them, and the sort of tools that people use for sharing?
Sure. Well, there's an example that's top of mind because it just happened a few days ago, which I found quite interesting. Is one of our clients who have a vendor of financial services software. So basically, quite important that, you know, someone can get into all their financial data. And we were sort of making some changes to their systems, and we said, hey guys, can you just send us details on how we migrate this customer over onto their new systems? And they said, yes, fine, no problem. And they sent us a Word document with all the usernames and passwords for all the access needed for everybody in the organization. And I just looked and said, uh-oh, there's a problem. Yeah. So I immediately wrote back to them and said, guys, this isn't okay. You can't do this. Now you've sent me this, which is what I asked for, but I wanted it in a secure way, not like this. Can you please send it, reset these passwords and send it to us by a secure method? And they wrote back and said, we don't have a secure method. And I thought, right, okay, right. Let's go back one step further and say, right, here's 3 secure methods that you can use to send us. I mean, if you use Office 365, options, encrypt email, done. That's a secure email suddenly. It's 2 clicks and you're there. Right. So it's not that hard. If you don't use 365, there's other platforms that can do encrypted email, or there's any number of platforms you can use to actually securely transmit data. But you just have to, first of all, you have to think about it. And if you've got service providers like this not thinking about it, and they clearly hadn't, because the steps to how to access the system also said, oh, by the way, you'll have to forgive the fact that there'll be security warnings as you go through this process because we're using self-signed certificates. We're like, okay, so right, so we're training our users now to basically ignore all the security warnings. So when next time they get a real security warning, they're going to ignore it, and that's that's what we've told them to do, and that's just really, really bad. So yeah, I think there's some great, very easy to use. I mean, there's open source projects. We've kind of made copies of open source projects and deployed them ourselves for our own internal use, where it's so easy to just securely send data. If you Google search how to send data securely, there'll be 400 different services allow you to do that. It's probably worth vetting them just to make sure that one of them isn't stealing all your information. But as I said, there's lots of good open source projects.
So I'll stick my head above the parapet and say that I often use, because we're a Google house, I often use Google Drive. And here we go. I create a folder for sharing, so I don't share from within my G Drive. I put it as a separate, within my drive, but it's a separate folder for external sharing. And I say, okay, I'm going to share this with Shabad. And then within that, I can just put that it's your email address. And so I can also see when someone's accessed that, I can turn that off and all this sort of stuff. So that's the typical way that we share information. Or if it's a Word, if it's a Microsoft document, you can encrypt it really easily before sending it and send the key separately. So what do you think to the sort of the Google Drive folder sharing? It's definitely a step up from emailing an open document.
Yeah, absolutely, and it is secure because, as you said, if you've said this other person needs to authenticate, then your data is encrypted at rest, it's encrypted in transit, it's authenticated access. Actually, that's really good. There's nothing really bad about that. The fact, okay, you've got data sitting at rest somewhere on a third-party system, and as Jean was saying, and Chris actually, because both of their systems actually don't rely on having data sitting on somebody else's cloud for any length of time. It just disappears or it doesn't go onto someone else's cloud. So that's better in a way, but it's difficult, I guess, to live in this world and not have your data in the cloud anywhere. So,
and I think we take the view that you will have a trusted provider. I think Google has so many people working on security, and that our the systems all set up for us to have that G Drive is secured, so access, as you say, is secured on there. But I think for all of our documents, what we do is we then, once we've confirmed with the person they've got that information, and you can put a time limit on it and whatever, then we take that information down, so it's no longer in that external sharing folder, and that also makes it an easy way to use it. So Chris, in terms of sharing, because there's password managers have vaults and everything, can you sort of take us through how password managers can also help with sharing and storing key information across a team?
Yeah, I guess documents is probably a little bit of a stretch from a password management point of view, but certainly things can be shared that aren't passwords. So credentials, I guess, for credit card details, that kind of thing. Secure notes. So I guess if you are an MSP, you could probably use it to send notes across sort of short pieces of text. And it works in exactly the same way as passwords, that it's obviously transmitted using the internet. So I guess we use, in the Mikey's case, we use cloud servers to move the data or to sort of initiate the transfers, but then the data moves from one computer to another. So there's nothing in between that can sort of hijack that and take it from there. So, I mean, I guess, sharing of documents, I mean, not that anyone trusts me with any kind of really sensitive information, but I mean, what I'll do the same as you. I'll generally share with a sort of Google link if it's a document, but if it's just a secure note, if there's a password in it, in an MSP scenario, it could be a PIN number for a server cabinet or a comms room or something. You can treat that as though it's a password within a password manager. So I guess that a password manager is probably a little bit of a restrictive term for it, really, because you can use it to share other kinds of information.
And so, Jean, building on from that, then I suppose, did you actually get the idea for Traceless from dealing with all this as an MSP and thinking, how can we share these
absolutely.
files as well?
Yeah, I mean, we had somebody in our peer group who does incident response, and hearing the ways that attackers are infiltrating MSPs is nothing short of completely frightening. And it's pretty sophisticated, and no stone is unturned when you're an attacker. And I just realized that we had all this sensitive data in our ticketing system and all the emails of the requesters of our companies, who are probably the biggest targets from attack vectors on their company, also had the sensitive data. And one of the peers was having a hard time with identity verification. So we kind of felt that was a very harmonious relationship in the cycle of verifying identity and then releasing privileged information.
Yeah. It's an interesting one. And so, Shabad, when you're looking at using, you said 3 different types of sharing, and you said so you can click encrypt on Office 365, and then there's obviously the sort of the links. What other sort of methodologies would someone use for security sharing? I mean, obviously you could. Well, how often do you come across actually sending old-fashioned hard copy stuff anymore? Do you ever hear about that anymore?
We did have someone the other day that there was a good one where someone said, "Oh, can you fax this over to me?" And the response was, "Sorry, I don't have fax where I live." And she said, "Where do you live?" And the guy said, "I live in 2020." So no, I don't think we have that much anymore. And I think particularly now with COVID and things, there's definitely, sorry, I said the word. Beers are on me next time. So yeah, I think that everyone's transitioning to more paperless, electronic, e-signing, things like that. So using definitely going paperless. So we're seeing definitely less of that. And as you said, things that everyone's using already, whether you're using Dropbox, whether you're using G Drive, whether you're using Microsoft 365 and OneDrive and SharePoint, they've all got secure sharing mechanisms built directly into them. I don't really know that many people who'd be using one of something else apart from these. There are others. There's lots of other platforms like Ignite and Box and things like that. But they've all got the ability to just right-click and share. And if you do that, even if someone doesn't have an account on that system, with OneDrive, for example, you can just right-click and share a folder with someone or a file with somebody. They'll get an email saying, "Robert would like to share a file with you." And you go and click the link. It'll take you to the thing and say, "Right, we've sent you another email with a one-time password. If you get that email, pop in the password, you can see the files." It's that easy. So you don't actually have to have an account. You don't have to authenticate in that sense, but it's secure because, again, it's encrypted at rest, it's encrypted in transit, and it's been authenticated. So it's actually quite easy to get that.
And just in this last few minutes, you mentioned working from home. And that's one of the questions we've had in. We've been dealing mostly with the questions as we go through, but one question was on remote working and working from home with the lockdown. So maybe is there anything to sort of top tips and typical errors on working from home from each of you? Maybe let's finish on that. Maybe Jean, should we start with you?
Yep, sure. Like what the device they're working on, and is that device hardened, right? So I think we have a lot of people maybe leaving computers in the office and working on their home devices. I think it's easy, but it may not be the right thing from a security perspective. And then, like I said before, making sure 2FA is turned on everywhere. It's literally the easiest thing you can do to give you the biggest bang for your buck from a security perspective.
Fantastic. And Chris, he's stolen your thunder a bit, but
Yeah, I did a little. Yeah, I have. I guess just before I say that, I guess as a positive, and I'm clutching here, but as a positive of COVID, I guess it probably has brought this into focus a little bit more with people working from home. It's a little bit like the transition to home working. It's kind of accelerated the thinking in the IT space a little bit. So I think maybe it will accelerate or improve security as we go forward. Obviously, my thing would be it's around reusing passwords, and if it's kind of using a password manager or not, 2FA is always going to help that. Another benefit of a password manager, which is, and this is not just Mikey, this would be all of them or most of them, as you mentioned at the start, then kind of one of the biggest problems is phishing. So if a phishing email comes through and you use a password manager, when it presents a logon page or a fake logon page for Office 365 or something, it may look identical to an Office 365 login, but your credentials won't be appearing to autofill because the password manager will know it's not Office 365. So I think that having a password manager, again, can just help with that extra level against phishing, and then with 2FA. So, don't reuse passwords, try and use a password manager and just be vigilant. It's always a case of, and I think we touched upon this, I'm sorry to keep rambling on, but this mentioned at the very, very start that it's always going to be the case that any kind of security like this is probably more frustrating to a user than having no security. And I guess it's trying to explain to them why it is and educating. The users will probably all probably rather use username and then password. It's easier for them, but I guess it's just trying to explain that that's not best practice. So education as well, I'll throw that into the mix.
Like Donald Trump MAGA 2020 for Twitter. And Shabad, last word for you. So in terms of building on that, and then the sort of the working from home and top tips and typical errors.
Sure. Well, I think the guys have covered all the important bits, so I'm not sure I'll add much to it, but I'll probably expand on it a little bit. So I think some of the things and we've been helping a lot of our clients, scramble to enable remote working over the last year, although fortunately most of our clients were set up already for good secure remote working. So it wasn't, if we had to help everybody, that just wouldn't have worked. So simple, a few things like Jean mentioned, everyone's taking devices home, they may be working from home devices. So first of all, make sure that there's encryption on all of those devices. You've got to have that, otherwise it's hard. Make sure that if you're using a home device, it probably doesn't have the password policy from your organization, so make sure you've got a good strong password on that. As Chris mentioned, make sure you've got 2FA or MFA on it, use a password manager. I think there's as far as possible, try not to share your work device with your family, because that's a big risk, saying, oh yeah, you can just use this in the evening and go on and play these games. That it really increases the attack surface. So we try not to do that. Phishing emails, I think, as Chris was saying, one of the things is remind staff that it's okay to admit if they've clicked on one, because it's really important to take action at that stage, not to just be like, oh, I've just given my password away and now I'm just going to keep quiet about it, because that's that's going to end up being even worse. So just let everybody know it's okay, mistakes happen, but report it immediately, and then IT can deal with it. We tend to also do simulated phishing anyway, so that's a really good thing. If you can set up simulated phishing and send people simulated phishing emails, then you can track their clicks, you can educate them, you can train them, and you've done that without actually suffering a breach. So that's really good. I think there's lots of good things about making sure make your cameras and microphones are muted or switched off, and privacy and confidentiality. There's either potential for embarrassment, as we've all seen on people going to the loo and leaving their laptops off and things like that, or actual breaches of privacy and security if you've left your camera or microphone on.
Thank you so much. We could go on for ages. I knew this was going to be a really good conversation. That's a fantastic 45-minute run through, building up from the ground up what IAM is, and also about sharing. And thanks, Chris, for flagging about it's not just internal identity, it's the external identities as well that you're dealing with. Chris, Jean, Shabad, thank you so much. That's been fantastic. This will go up on the Privacy Kitchen channel very shortly. And just want to say thank you for all the viewers, and thank you to all the guest chefs. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.